Most graduate programs do not offer training in scientific writing, and that was certainly the case for me when I was in graduate school. Now, I was fortunate to have a mentor who was invested in my writing, but even he followed traditional conventions that plague poor writing in the sciences. And now that I've been a scientific and medical editor for more than a decade, I know how to transform complex language into clear, concise, and compelling writing. So in this video, I'm going to share some things that I wish I knew about scientific writing in grad school by reviewing a short excerpt from my thesis and showing you how I would write it today. And if we haven't met, hello, my name is Crystal Heron. I'm a trained biomedical scientist turned clinical researcher and now a distinguished scientific and medical editor. And I help scientists, clinicians, and other professional writers master the craft of writing so they can write with intention and maximize their impact in their field. Now, before we dive into the excerpt, I have a couple of things to note. First, the excerpt is only one long sentence. And I chose a short piece because I really want to be mindful of your time and I don't want to hit you with a fire hose of information. My hope is that you walk away with just a few helpful tips. But if you'd like me to work through a longer excerpt in a video like this, let me know in the comments. Second, because this is only a single sentence, the revisions will be what is called line editing. And if you're not familiar with this type of editing involves reviewing at the sentence level, which does not consider contextual factors in the content or the surrounding sentences of the particular sentence being edited. And those factors are really important to consider for the clarity and flow of the text. And you'll get a flavor for that as we review the excerpt in this video. And third, I want to emphasize that there isn't one right way to write something. In this video, I will share one way to revise a sentence, but that is not the only possible way. Often when I edit, I will experiment with the text by writing multiple versions and then choosing the one that I like best. And if you are inspired to revise the sentence on your own, I'd love to see your vision in the comments below. We can all learn different ways to write by seeing how other people might revise a sentence. In fact, in my Scientific Writing Simplified course in the Redwooding Academy, we have weekly exercises like this where I post an excerpt to be revised and members can share how they would revise the text. It's the most popular space in the Academy. And actually, if you are watching this before September 21st, 2025, we are running a fall accelerator program for the course. I'll add a link to the description box in case you want to check it out. Okay, let's get to the excerpt. Okay, so here's the excerpt, and I'm going to read it, so bear with me for a moment. Studies utilizing antibodies to block the function of different regions of the extracellular domain of VE cadherin have demonstrated that the EC1 domain is important in vessel formation and the control of endothelial barrier function, while antibodies to the EC4 domain inhibit angiogenesis without affecting VE cadherin adhesive clusters or endothelial permeability. So this is a long, packed sentence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by pointing out a few things that I notice in this sentence, and then we will revise it piece by piece. So the biggest thing that's pretty clear is that the sentence is really long. And so this sentence is actually 52 words long. And ideally, you want to aim for your sentences to be no more than 25 words, and then to vary the lengths of your sentences to add rhythm and interest to your writing. So here we have a sentence that's twice as long as it should be. So we know that we definitely want to shorten it or break it up. And then the other thing with sentence length that you want to consider is the sentence making more than one point? And that can be a great indicator to let you know how to break the sentence up. And so in this case, the sentence is definitely making more than one point. We have a point about studies using antibodies to block the function of different regions of the extracellular domain of VE cadherin. We've also have that the EC1 domain is important in vessel formation and the control of barrier function. And then we have antibodies to the EC4 domain, inhibit angiogenesis, etc. Right? So we really have 3 points being made in this sentence. And so it could be broken up into 3 sentences, possibly 2. We'll see what this looks like at the end. So a couple of other things that I'm noticing is that there are a few words in here that I would make simple substitutions to. And we'll go ahead and do that. Let me make sure track changes is on so that you can see the changes that I make. So the first thing that stands out to me, which is really like a giant red flag every time I see it in writing, is the word utilizing. And so utilize, I believe, is the most misused word in scientific writing. I actually have an article on it that I will add to the description box in case you want to check it out. And so basically, without getting into too many details, utilize is often misused, and that a more accurate and more readable word to use is the word use. And so I'm going to quickly change this to using. And we're going to keep revising. There are additional things that we're going to change as well, but I'm going to do a couple things that are fairly straightforward. So another thing that I notice here is that the word demonstrated is a long word. You could substitute it with the word show. I'm going to throw that in here for now. We're going to make some other changes that might make this go away altogether, but I wanted to give you that example. So the more long words you use in the writing, the more complex and harder it is to understand. And there are ways where you can make shorter substitutions. And I'll add a link to an article that I wrote in the description box. Okay, so those are a couple of quick things. Some other things that I notice in here, we have some wordy language in here. We have the control of. Whenever you have a word that has the before it and of after, it's usually a nominalization, which is a word that has a suffix on the end, and basically it's taking a verb and turning it into a noun. And so it's basically stripping the power and the energy and the persuasiveness from your writing. In this case, control doesn't have that suffix. And so I like to call it a masquerading nominalization. And the flag for that for me is when you have the and of on either side of the word. So just to watch for those words in your writing. I also have an article on nominalizations. I will add that to the description box as well. So that's another thing that I want to keep my eye on. Another thing that I want to point out, and this one's a little bit tricky because it's about being precise and accurate, which is really important, but it's also something that's kind of become default accepted in the sciences, and so it's something to pay attention to. But we have here the word studies. And so this is saying that studies using antibodies, but really a study does not have the ability to use an antibody. It's actually the researchers that used the antibodies. And so I'm going to change this to researchers instead. And because it's more precise, it's more accurate. And so I'm going to make some additional changes as well, but we'll stick with this part. So we have researchers using antibodies to block, because the researchers are the ones that are using the antibodies, not the study. The study doesn't have the ability to do that. So another thing that I am noticing here is that different terms are being used to describe the same thing. And sometimes people will say, oh, you need to mix up your words because you need to make it interesting and you don't want to use the same words over and over again. And actually, it can be really helpful for your reader if you use similar terms but different verbs. And so similar terms make sure that you are talking about the exact same thing and that readers can follow exactly what that is. And different verbs are a way to mix up the language that you're using, to mix up the energy, because verbs are the the energy source, the power in your writing. They're like the mitochondria of writing in a way. And so my philosophy is similar terms, different verbs. And I have an article on that I will also add to the description box for you. So some of the words that are the terms, that are the same are vessel formation and angiogenesis. And so these mean the same thing in this context, but I used different words in this case. And so I want to make them the same because it's going to make it easier for readers to understand it. And so I'm going to choose to go with angiogenesis because it's one word instead of two. And in scientific writing, we'll take every word we can get. So I'm going to change vessel formation to angiogenesis. And then the other one that I notice where I have different terms is I have endothelial barrier function and I have endothelial permeability. And in this context, these things mean the same thing. And so I want to make them the same terms. So in this case, endothelial permeability is 2 words, endothelial barrier function, 3 words. So I'm going to change endothelial barrier function to endothelial permeability. So we've already cut a couple of words out. Now we still have a long sentence that we need to deal with, in addition to a couple other things. So the first thing that I want to do, let's do one break in this sentence. So I mentioned earlier that we have 3 points being made in this sentence. So we're going to start by breaking off and isolating the first point. And so the first point is that this piece here, researchers using antibodies to block the function of different regions of the extracellular domain of VE cadherin. So I'm going to make this its own sentence. I'm going to add a period here. And now it's an incomplete sentence with the way it's written because of this verb here, using. So we're going to say researchers used. So now we have researchers used antibodies to block the function of different regions of the extracellular domain of VE cadherin. So now we have that first sentence makes 1 point. And now we have this mess to deal with. And so here we have 2 points being made. But one thing that's not happening is that the structure of these different clauses in the sentence, so this first clause versus the second one, they don't have the same structure. They're not parallel. And parallel structure can also help with making it easier to read and understand. And I have an article on that as well that I will also link in the description box for you. So we have these 2 different points being made. They're not parallel. There are some other things that we need to consider to be able to revise it. But let's make it a complete sentence first. So what I want to do is I want to connect this information to the preceding sentence. And so that really helps with flow. And the way that you can do that is you start your sentence with a subject that somehow connects to this preceding sentence. It connects to either the topic of researchers or to some other aspect of this sentence. And so in this case, I'm going to use researchers. So I'm going to say they, and then rather saying they have shown, I'm just going to say they found. So now we have researchers used antibodies to block the function of different regions of the extracellular domain of VE cadherin. They found that. And so this they is connecting to researchers, and that's helping to connect these 2 sentences. Now, if you are finding this process insightful, you can submit a sample of your own writing for me to review in this same format. So in the description box, you'll find a link where you can share a short excerpt of your own writing for me to review in a YouTube video just like this one. And if you're feeling a little nervous about that idea, just know that I will keep you anonymous and we can redact the text if needed. If you want to learn more and submit an excerpt, you'll find a link in the description box. Okay, so now getting into a couple of other things. So this first part here is really vague. So we have that the EC1 domain is important. How is it important? What does it do in angiogenesis? It doesn't give anything specific. And same thing with the control of endothelial permeability. Well, how does this domain control endothelial permeability? The more specific we can be, the more precise, the more accurate the information is, and the more compelling it is, and the clearer it is. So there's so many benefits to being precise and accurate. And so if we only look at this sentence, we don't have enough information to get that. And so if I were editing this for a client, I would add a comment to query them and ask them, well, how exactly is this happening? This is a little bit vague. Can we make this more concrete? In this case, I'm the author. And so what I did is I went and looked at the particular reference that I was referring to look at those details so that I could incorporate them into this sentence. And so what I found was that the EC1 domain, it is important in angiogenesis because there's a key point. Let me backtrack here real quick. Here they found that the EC1 domain is important and then the EC4 domain is important, but the whole concept is about these antibodies that they're using to block these domains. And that piece is also missing from this first part. So we need to add in that they found that antibodies to the EC1 domain, because that's what they did in this study. So that is one detail that I had to confirm in the study. And then the next is, how exactly did it affect angiogenesis? Well, it inhibited angiogenesis. So the antibody, when the antibody attached to or blocked the EC1 domain, it inhibited angiogenesis. So they found that antibodies to the EC1 domain inhibit angiogenesis. And then we have this piece, the control of endothelial permeability. How did it control it? So when I looked this up, I found that it increased endothelial permeability. So they found that antibodies to the EC1 domain inhibit angiogenesis and increase endothelial permeability. So this is the first piece, and we're going to come back to this because there's another piece that we're going to need. Now, when we go to the second part of the sentence, while antibodies to the EC4 domain inhibit angiogenesis without affecting VE-cadherin adhesive clusters or endothelial permeability. So here we have more specific information. So we have inhibit angiogenesis without affecting these other pieces. So it's really clarifying it has the same thing as the EC1 domain, but these other pieces are different. And so this framing clarifies that detail. But one thing that I also notice is that in this second part of the sentence, we have three things that the antibodies are affecting. It's inhibiting angiogenesis without affecting VE-cadherin adhesive clusters or endothelial permeability. But when we look at EC1, we only have angiogenesis and endothelial permeability. So we don't have anything about VE-cadherin. And so if we want to be clear and include the details so that we have the information to actually really compare what's happening with EC1 versus what's happening with EC4, it's really helpful to include the detail about VE-cadherin as well. And so I would add to this first part the detail about VE-cadherin, and I would do whatever I could to parallel the same order that's in the second part. So angiogenesis, VE-cadherin adhesive clusters, or endothelial permeability. So then I would change this first part to, they found that antibodies to the EC1 domain inhibit angiogenesis. What they found in this study was displaced VE-cadherin from cell-to-cell contacts, or displace. This would be the same verb tense, right? Inhibit, displaced, increase. Displace is not the same verb tense, so we need to make that displace. So now they found that antibodies to the EC1 domain inhibit angiogenesis, displace VE-cadherin from cell-cell contacts, and increase endothelial permeability, while antibodies to the EC4 domain inhibit angiogenesis without affecting VE-cadherin adhesive clusters or endothelial permeability. Now, in this case, we're gonna do some more to this, but I want to point out that the displaced VE cadherin from cell-cell contacts and VE cadherin adhesive clusters, these terms don't match. But in this particular study, with what they did, making them match would not be as precise and accurate. So they're going to be different in this case. So there are times when you have to make exceptions. And my philosophy, or really the general philosophy in writing, is that writing is based on principles, not rules. And it's a matter of weighing when to use the principles at the best possible time. So in this case, this is going to be the best way to do it, even though it doesn't match. So now we have clear information in the first part of the sentence, and we have parallelism between the two parts of this really long sentence, but it's a lot to digest. So we have 35 words in this sentence. Remember, the maximum that we want is 25. Occasionally it's okay to go higher than that for things like lists. And there are a few other examples. I'll add articles to the description box for you about varying your sentence length and watching for overloaded sentences. But in this case, we want to break up this sentence. So when you want to break up a sentence, one of the easiest ways to find where to break it up is to look for conjunctions or subordinating conjunctions. So basically, it's a word that is connecting what could be two independent sentences. So and, or but are the most common, but there are some other ones, such as although, or in this case, while. So with while being here, this is an indicator that we can break up the sentence at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this sentence here, and then I'm going to delete while, and I'm going to replace it with however, which is a contrasting transition similar to how while is used in this case. In this case, while was actually misused. It wasn't the most precise use. I'll add an article on it to the description box for you. But in this case, we can still add a contrasting transition with however. And so now we have 3 independent sentences, and the structure of this sentence parallels the structure of this sentence, and the subject of this sentence, antibodies to the EC4 domain, connects to part of the preceding sentence, antibodies to the EC1 domain. It's not the exact same thing because you're looking at different extracellular domains, but that is helping to connect these two sentences. And then the however, the transition, is a signpost. I call them signposts to let readers know that we're not going in a linear train of thought. We're going to take a little bit of a turn on this reading path that we're on. So now we have 3 sentences. The first one is 16 words, the second one is 19 words, and the third one is 16 words. It's a little closer in length than I might typically aim for. However, in the middle sentence, we have a list with commas, and that's going to help create some of that rhythm in the writing. Because ideally, you don't want every single sentence to be the exact same length because it makes writing really monotonous and boring. And so mixing it up can help to add that rhythm and interest to your writing. So what I would do in this case is that middle sentence helps, but I would also really look at what are the sentences that come before this sentence, what are the sentences that come after this sentence, and really play around more with the lengths of those sentences to help add some more of that rhythm and interest to the writing. And so now with these revisions, we have a much clearer and more precise and more accurate group of sentences that we can use in the writing. And we have the same number of words at 52 words. So we didn't really cut any words, but we made the information so much clearer and more accurate and precise. So now this group of sentences reads, researchers used antibodies to block the function of different regions of the extracellular domain of VE cadherin. They found that antibodies to the EC1 domain inhibit angiogenesis, displace VE cadherin from cell-cell contacts, and increase endothelial permeability. However, antibodies to the EC4 domain inhibit angiogenesis without affecting VE cadherin adhesive clusters or endothelial permeability. So now the information is much clearer for readers. So I've covered a lot of tips in real time in this video, and there are links to articles in the description box if you want to learn more about some of the topics that I covered. But some of these topics require a much deeper dive than a short article can cover or that I can cover in this video. If you want to take that deeper dive, I highly recommend checking out my Scientific Writing Simplified course. I'd be thrilled to have you. And if you want a preview of one of the topics covered in that course, check out this video about the built-in story structure in original research manuscripts. And if there's something in particular that you'd like to learn more about, let me know in the comments. I create these videos for you, so I want to make sure that I'm creating something that you will find valuable. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day, and I hope to see you in the next video.